No man should be playing in the WNBA. No man should be competing against women in female sports. We got to stop it. Men should play against men, females should play against females, and transgenders should play against transgenders. Simple. That's not being anti-trans. That's being pro.
Stephen A. Smith did not just criticize the WNBA. He appeared ready to set the entire conversation on fire. What started as another debate over the league's biggest controversy quickly turned into a full-blown rant, with Stephen A. questioning decisions, exposing uncomfortable contradictions, and leaving fans wondering who he was really aiming at. But what happened next made the situation even messier. Did Stephen A. go too far, or did he say what others were afraid to admit?
Enes Kanter Freedom was wearing a shirt supposedly in support of women. And here's the scene right here for you to see for yourself. It was a messy situation, to say the least. And it's obviously something that's going to be politicized, because there's a lot of people that have feelings about this. All I have to say is 2 points. Number one is that I told you so. There are people that say, we just want to talk basketball. We just want to play basketball. Whatever. You don't get to decide for constituencies.
What exactly happened that made Stephen A. Smith turn his attention toward the WNBA and deliver one of his most explosive reactions yet? This was not another ordinary debate about a questionable foul call, a player feud, or someone missing a layup with the entire arena watching. Instead, a controversy involving the league opened the door to a much bigger argument, pulling sports, politics, and public outrage into one increasingly chaotic conversation that even he could not ignore.
I just think people are running from issues, and I don't think in this business you're supposed to run from issues. And the fact that everybody's running from the big elephant in the room involving the WNBA and the latest with Coach Stephanie White of the Indiana Fever going on a little tirade during a post-game press conference because people were accusing her of not supporting her player after Sophie Cunningham was essentially, knocked upside the damn head by Dejanay Carrington, and she didn't speak up.
This time, Stephen A. found himself reacting to a situation involving former NBA player and activist Enes Kanter Freedom, a WNBA game between the Chicago Sky and Indiana Fever, and a confrontation that quickly became about much more than basketball.
With careful consideration and reviewing the current eligibility guidelines, I am officially declaring myself a WNBA prospect. If simply declaring who you are is all that's required, then I meet every single requirement necessary to compete in the WNBA.
So you see what Enes Kanter had to say, right? You see how much of a mess this is becoming, right? And everybody want to act like, oh my goodness, we don't want to hate on trans. We don't want to hate on trans folks. That's not what that's about. Anybody who's hating on them should be ashamed of themselves. The WNBA, the NBA, and everybody else in between is absolutely right when they talk about not violating people's civil rights and liberties, not being hateful, not engaging in hate in any way, shape, form, or fashion, whether verbally, physically.
According to the discussion Stephen A. responded to, Kanter attended the game wearing a shirt connected to the debate over women's sports, transgender participation, and the political arguments surrounding the issue. The reaction inside the arena became tense, particularly after WNBA player Natasha Cloud confronted the situation.
The heightened level of sensitivity that's come associated with the WNBA, and I don't blame them one bit. I want to say that. But here's the reason I don't blame them. Because what Enes Kanter did, although he had every right to do it, and although it's clearly to bring attention to the unfairness of not specifically defining what a woman is in a collective bargaining agreement, and as a result, somebody who is transgender and can wake up and say, I'm a female and I want to participate in the NBA, according to the letter of the language of the law, you can actually get away with it. And that needs to be clarified. Clearly, that's a political.
And that was when Stephen A. Smith essentially looked at the entire mess, took a deep breath, and decided that nobody was going to escape criticism because Stephen A.'s central argument was surprisingly complicated. He believed Cantor had a legitimate right to express his opinion, and he also agreed with the broader argument that biological males should not compete against biological females in women's professional sports. At the same time, he thought Cantor's behavior toward the players at the game crossed a line. In other words, Stephen A. managed to say, "I understand your point, but your delivery was a disaster," which is basically the sports debate version of telling somebody that their cooking is delicious while quietly throwing the plate into the trash. The first thing Stephen A. made clear was that the WNBA has entered an entirely new era of attention, controversy, and public debate. For years, the conversation might have been about physicality, television ratings, or who said what on a podcast 3 weeks ago. At this point, the WNBA conversation has become so crowded that basketball sometimes has to wait patiently in the corner and ask whether anybody remembers that there is actually a game being played. Stephen A. addressed this growing tension by pushing back against the idea that analysts, reporters, or players can simply demand that fans ignore controversial issues. His argument was straightforward. The audience decides what interests the audience.
Just put it where the GOATs can get it, because evidently people don't want to do that. The WNBA, and I want to emphasize, I'm not saying it's fair. I'm certainly not saying it's right. And I will speak out against those that are doing this in a second. But it's important that the WNBA wakes up and acknowledges something. There's a lot of people that don't like you. There's a lot of people that don't like you.
That was one of Stephen A.'s biggest frustrations. He essentially argued that nobody gets to dictate the interests of an entire fan base. And whether people like it or not, controversy has brought enormous attention to the WNBA. Now, before anybody starts celebrating chaos as though it is a championship parade, Stephen A. was not saying that every controversy is automatically good. He was pointing out something much more uncomfortable. Stephen A. compared that reality to the entertainment philosophy often heard in sports. If people are watching, talking, checking social media, and waiting to see what happens next, then your relevance is difficult to deny. Stephen A. acknowledged that Cantor has a long history of political activism and public advocacy. He discussed Cantor's willingness to speak out against governments and powerful institutions, including issues connected to Turkey and China, even when doing so created serious personal consequences. Stephen A. made it clear that he respected that history and understood why Cantor would be passionate about political issues. But then Stephen A. turned around and delivered the part of the argument that probably surprised some people. He said, in essence, that the WNBA players themselves did not deserve to become the target of Cantor's demonstration. That distinction mattered enormously to him.
Wrong. It was a classless thing for him to do, because it's not, the ladies that are playing don't have anything to do with this. The league does. Its collective bargaining agreement may be the case. The liberal tilt that it has might be a cause or a cause effect to some degree. I get all of that, but the actual ladies that are involved, they have nothing to do with this, and they don't deserve to be agitated the way he clearly was willing to do in attendance at the game. It wasn't just about him standing, but he was just about to step to her. You got no business doing that. You got no business doing that.
And Stephen A. believed that antagonizing those players during a game was excessive. This was where Natasha Cloud entered the conversation. Cloud reacted to Cantor's presence and message, and Stephen A. argued that her frustration was understandable. From the player's perspective, he said, the demonstration could appear as though the women themselves were being mocked or targeted, even though Cantor's larger argument was directed at a broader political issue. His position was essentially that people could understand Cantor's larger point while still criticizing the way he chose to present it. You either agree with everything a person has ever said, or you are suddenly expected to treat that person as the greatest villain since somebody decided that pineapple belonged on pizza. There is rarely much room for the possibility that someone might have a legitimate concern while still handling the situation badly. But that was exactly the distinction he was trying to make. The conversation became even louder when former NBA player Steven Jackson entered the debate and delivered his own strong opinion about the issue. That was when the discussion took another dramatic turn, because once his comments became part of the conversation, the reaction from Stephen A. became even more direct and forceful.
You're supposed to make sure that it is clear where your rules stand. Women, how come you didn't write in your language those born female? How come you didn't make that clear? Because if you were born a female, even if you're transitioning to being a female, because you weren't born a female, that would make you ineligible to enter the WNBA. Why didn't you do that? This whole issue has been fomenting and gaining steam and traction for years. It was used in the presidential election. It was used in the midterms before the presidential election. It's going to be used in the midterms this November. And if the right has their way, it's going to be brought up again.
At that point, he was not interested in hiding behind vague television language or carefully constructed phrases designed to keep everybody comfortable. He argued directly that male athletes should not compete against female athletes in women's professional sports and maintained that, in his view, the concern centered on competitive fairness rather than hostility toward transgender people. However, he continued to emphasize that Cantor's broader argument should not be confused with the specific way he behaved at the game. He made it clear that simply dismissing the entire debate without addressing the questions behind it was not a solution either. This placed him in an unusual position because he was effectively standing between two different sides of the controversy and criticizing aspects of both, which is difficult enough for an ordinary person, but, for him, seemed to be little more than another day of professional cardio. The entire controversy also exposed a much larger issue surrounding the modern WNBA, which is that the league is now operating under an enormous spotlight, and that spotlight no longer shines exclusively on the basketball being played on the court. Every major sports league eventually learns that the larger the audience becomes, the more different groups of people become invested in the conversation.
As Cantor is pointing to is about competition. So for somebody to transition from male to female, and for folks to act like it would be okay for them to participate in the WNBA is ridiculous. And when you have athletes from the WNBA saying that they're looking out for and speaking up on behalf of girls, because it would clearly be an unfair advantage to a trans athlete over people born female, what's the problem? What's the problem? We got to have common sense. And yes, Enes Kanter is going to...
Some fans are there because they genuinely love the sport, while others are primarily interested in supporting particular players, following cultural conversations, discussing political issues, or simply finding out what everyone is arguing about on social media. There are also those people who arrive because they saw one dramatic clip online, have absolutely no idea what happened before or after it, and yet somehow feel completely prepared to deliver a 40-minute lecture explaining exactly who is wrong. That is the reality of the WNBA's current situation, which usually becomes even louder because Stephen A. has never been known for quietly placing an opinion on the table and walking away. Somewhere, whenever his name becomes attached to a controversial sports debate, there is probably a content creator preparing a 3-hour live stream before the next commercial break. That is the environment surrounding this controversy. And he also suggested that the increased political and cultural attention surrounding the WNBA may partly reflect the league's growing importance. People generally do not spend this much time arguing about something they consider completely irrelevant, although that particular form of attention can be both valuable and exhausting.
I'm talking about the league. We got to stop playing games. And we got to get down to the nitty-gritty of this all. I see my girl, Janae Ogumake, who is a sensational basketball analyst, and yesterday, Andrea Carter, another sensational basketball analyst. I think they're two of the best basketball analysts in America. They are doing everything they can, especially in the part of Janae Ogumake, trying to get everybody and their mother.
The uncomfortable reality is that relevance attracts supporters and critics in equal measure. The more successful and visible the league becomes, the more people will want to participate in the conversation, and not all of them will arrive for the same reasons or with the same opinions. The WNBA has sought greater attention for its players, its basketball, and its stars, and it has undoubtedly entered a period in which the public conversation surrounding the league is louder than ever before. However, greater visibility does not automatically make everything easier because attention can also bring arguments, political disagreements, media controversies, and an endless supply of social media experts who suddenly believe they know exactly what is happening. That does not make the constant noise any less exhausting for everyone involved. His reaction also raised a much larger question about the relationship between sports and politics, and where athletes, leagues, and fans should draw the line between the two. The reality is that sports and politics have never been completely separate, regardless of how often people wish they could place them in different rooms and lock the doors. Athletes have used their platforms for decades to speak about social issues, governments, discrimination, wars, elections, and human rights. Cantor himself became widely known for his political activism beyond basketball, while WNBA players have also been outspoken about issues they believe deserve public attention.